work out for them? We'll have to find out.
The 9th round of the season begins in 5 lights time. And the Canadian Grand Prix is underway. They crawl off the line with George Russell chopping across Max Verstappen as they make their way to turn number 1. The plumes of spray are raised and the top 4 are in the same position. Fernando Alonso gets past Daniel Ricciardo to the apex of turn 2. A huge amount of standing water on the racetrack as they squeeze the throttle. Further back we go, and you can see Sergio Perez close there with Gasly.
Slightly sliding, Gasly coming across him a little bit, all trying to find a bit of space on a narrow circuit.
Magnussen is going all the way to the front of the field as it stands. He's passing people for fun, and he's up 7 places from where he started.
Both of them making good gains. 7 places for Magnussen, 5 for Hülkenberg. Ocon flinging the car through. The grip level's just so low. Magnussen's past Hamilton.
Magnussen gets another one. He is having the time of his life.
So this level of rain is the worst we expect.
We go on board with a man on a mission. Denmark's Kevin Magnussen about to take P5 when he stands on the brakes. He's in another lead right now on that full wet tyre.
Great fun for Magnussen, who's got more grip than anyone around him. Now on the tail of Oscar Piastri, who can't turn that McLaren, and K-Mag just squeezes on the throttle, and he's going to be with the McLaren in 4th position. He's round the McLaren in 4th position on the exit.
We had a lot of fun with Kevin Magnussen, but now Haas have conceded that it's time. Oh, it's slow, it's so slow. And after all of that overtaking, it's a slow stop for Kevin Magnussen, who sees all of that hard work undone. Can Norris line up for the overtake? Here's the opportunity for Lando Norris, who started in 3rd, trying to claim 2nd place. How powerful is the DRS? There's your answer. Lando Norris gets past Max Verstappen and takes 2nd place in the Grand Prix.
This is an opportunity. Russell's not had to defend from the DRS yet.
This is the battle for the lead. Norris moving past, under braking and going through. George Russell is over the chicane, but he's in 2nd place now. It might be about to come 3rd position because he's lost the lead. Verstappen's gone by and Lando Norris leads the Canadian Grand Prix. Oh, car off the road and into the barrier. Logan Sargent with damage to the Williams. The safety car is deployed, and there is Logan Sargent. Verstappen, Russell and Piastri, 2nd, 3rd and 4th, come into the pits.
Red Bull's pit crew normally so good. Russell was released very quickly.
Oh, it's tight, but they just cover off the Mercedes, and they will leave the pits in the same order that they entered. And the driver who had disappeared from Verstappen and Russell and Piastri now comes into the pits as Verstappen, Russell and Piastri go past.
So this is going to be close then, because Norris has lost a load of time behind the safety car. There you can see Verstappen.
Max Verstappen is going to retake the lead. There's that line. They were racing to that point. McLaren versus McLaren. Lando Norris is P3. We have most of the cars, all of the cars on intermediate. Charles Leclerc has risked the hard tyres. He's hoping for something truly extraordinary. The rain is closing in nearby, and Verstappen has aced the restart. Let's look at the overtakes further back. One Williams still left in the Grand Prix is Alex Albon, and he is fighting his way past the RB, fighting his way past the Alpine, and that is dramatic stuff. To get up to 9th, he got past Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon.
One of the great moves. Brilliant stuff.
The last 3 cars on intermediate tyres are the first 3 cars in the Grand Prix.
It's going to be a pit stop race. In goes Verstappen, in goes Russell. No, Norris stays out. Big decision there for McLaren. Hamilton does the fastest middle sector of the race. He was 1 second quicker than Verstappen in the middle sector as Verstappen had an in-lap.
That looks slow for George Russell as he rejoins and Red Bull cover off the move. You can still see it's really slippy at this part of the circuit. Norris has been firing this car around the 14 turns of Montreal. Has he built himself a gap as he comes into the pits? So you lose 18 seconds. You've got the pit stop as well. Remember, tyre temperature will be an issue. Lando Norris on the right, Max Verstappen on the left-hand side of your picture. You've got a slightly wet pit exit, but you've got Verstappen going through turn number 1, and Lando Norris is going to be standing on the power in the lead of the Canadian Grand Prix for a second, but the tyres aren't up to temperature, and it was worth the gamble, but Verstappen retakes first place in the race. Okay, Lando Norris, there's the lock-up. Does that open it for George Russell? Nothing between the two British drivers. Lando Norris under serious pressure now. He jumped Russell with the pit stop, an inventive strategy for McLaren, but there's nothing between the two of them. It's drying all the time. The error into the hairpin opens the door for George Russell to take second place in the Grand Prix.
Oh, Russell's gone in deep, has he?
Yes, he has. Does he open the door? Lando Norris is off the racing line, but he's back into second place. Russell goes off the road. Lando goes off the racing line, and they're scrambling over the road for second place. It swaps again.
Yeah, clambering over the curbs. Then it got damp on the exit, and that's when Norris came through fighting the car.
Perez has brought out the yellow flag. He went deep. He did continue. And the rear wing has taken a battering. Oh, off the road goes Carlos Sainz. And he is rejoining. Alex Albon involved in that. He's just to the right-hand side, I believe. Do we have here once again? It's a safety car out on the circuit. So this is going to be, first of all, Sergio Perez got deep, got wide, onto the wet part of the circuit, spinning to the wall.
So Sainz has his own moment. Oh, it's gutting for Albon.
So unlucky. George Russell comes into the pits. He brings his teammate as well. A new set of slick tyres. The green flag flies at the circuit Gilles Villeneuve. We go racing all the way to the end now. That is perfectly timed for the three-time world champion. And so we're looking at the battle with the second McLaren. The man from Melbourne staying ahead, but for how much longer? Russell trying to power around the outside, dead close to contact. They're nearly banging wheels into the corner. Russell rejoins. Piastri stays ahead, P3, and Lewis Hamilton's roaring by as well, up to fourth place. Meanwhile, in the battle for the podium places, Lewis Hamilton has the DRS, and that Mercedes does get ahead before the braking zone. Can Russell get by this time around? That's his aim. That's what he's done. Russell gets past, up to fourth position.
Let's see what happened to Yuki.
Chasing down Esteban Ocon, but he went off the road at turn 8, put it flat to the floor, spins the car, is narrowly avoided by those behind. Russell versus Hamilton, the two silver arrows heading to the final chicane.
We are racing. Just remember, that goes without saying. Keep it clean, please.
He had the warning, but he got the place. For the 60th time in Formula One, Max Verstappen takes the win. Red Bull back on top. Max Verstappen wins the Canadian Grand Prix. Lando Norris is second, and it's George Russell across the line to complete the podium.
This is the Outlap F1 podcast featuring America's own Cody, Andy, and Deanna. Your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. Join us on the Outlap. Back home again, and it feels so good. Welcome on in. This is season 6. This is episode 21 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2024 Canadian GP race review show. You've got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight. I am now back, as you can kind of see, back in my normal podcast recording locale, the corner of my dining room where I have allocated turning it into a studio. Cody, nice, good to see you're in your normal spot as well. So we should be technically all good to go. Boy, was that a fun show today. How'd you enjoy it?
I loved it. I had a good feeling about it after the crazy wet qualifying, and I flip on the TV today to find that it is going to be a wet start. And I was like, ooh, I even sent you a message. This could be a doozy. And it was. We'll get into it here. Probably the best race that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, probably the most intense watch I've had in a very, very long time. Even the wins. This one was very intense throughout. But we're going to get into all that in just a little bit. So welcome on in, as David Croft would say. And if you found our show, you can find us on Twitter, X, whatever that platform is called. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Discord, Reddit, and of course on YouTube at Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle. You can see our link tree for all of the ways that we are, or where we're all available to you. If you enjoy what you're seeing and you like what you're hearing, you can smash the subscribe button on YouTube or give us a like, or you can click the 5-star button on your favorite podcasting app, specifically Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Email the show. You can always do that. Chat now at outlapf1.com takes you there. Thank you so much to our monetary supporters who enabled our preview broadcast to go on uninterrupted as normal, even though I wasn't in my normal spot. Thank you so much to Dean Warwick, Erie Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of what we call the hashtag Outlap F1 Nation, you can see our link tree and you can find our show notes in all of our episodes. It's our anchor page, $1, $5, all goes into making the show better. All goes into maintaining equipment that we already have or upgrading equipment to enable us to do cool stuff like broadcasting from a cabin out in the woods. Last little bit before we hop on in, you can check out the good folks at Manscaped and get 20% off and free shipping on their lovely product with our code OUTLAP. That's OUTLAP, all one word. We shall start with the headline of the day. Cody, I'll let you go first. What you got?
And my headline is that we saw both sides of the F1 coin only in the span of 2 weeks. We went from one of the most boring races I have ever seen in Monaco, a procession with practically no passes, the first time in F1's history where the top 10 finished where they started, but a feel-good victory, with Charles Leclerc taking the home win. Fast forward to today with the Canadian Grand Prix, it was all up in the air, changeable conditions, unexpected qualifying order. There were many parts of the race where I did not know who was going to win. There were several very strong contenders throughout, but it gets wrapped up with Max returning to the top step on the podium.
All right, very good. Like that summary there. My headline is, Oh, Canada. That was fun. If nothing else, that was really, really fun. And that was fitting payback for all the F1 faithful after 2 weeks ago in Monaco, where, like you said, the top 10 never moved. And we went around for 78 laps and really nothing happened other than on lap 1. Yeah, just a great overall fun, interesting, intense, all sorts of twists and turns. One guy's got it, then another guy's got it. You don't know where this is going to end up. Had me on the edge of my seat until the final lap, all the way till we saw the checkered flag fall. So we're going to get into this weekend. We're going to get into all of the sessions in just a little bit. We will start with our qualifying recap, which was in tricky changeable conditions throughout the course of the weekend. This weekend was basically an entire tricky changeable conditions. So we're going to get into that now, and here we go. All right. So starting from the pit lane eventually because of a bad qualifying, that was the Sauber of Zhao Guanyu in P20. P19 was Nico Hulkenberg. P18 was Esteban Ocon. P17, he would eventually start from the pit lane as well, but he qualified 17th. That was Valtteri Bottas. P16, shocker of qualifying here. He's got a new contract. It didn't seem to matter. Sergio Checo Perez out in Q1. Ouch. P15 was Pierre Gasly in the Alpine. P14, Kevin Magnussen. P13 was Logan Sargent. P12 was Carlos Sainz. P11, Charles Leclerc. So both Ferraris and a Red Bull not in Q3. Wow, didn't think we would ever see that. The top 10 from 10 to 1. P10 was Alex Albon in the Williams. P9, Lance Stroll, screwing up our predictions right away. P8 was Yuki Tsunoda. P7 was Lewis Hamilton. P6 was Fernando Alonso. P5, one of the stars qualifying for me, probably had some extra motivation from a certain pundit. Daniel Ricciardo in the V-Carb. P4 was Oscar Piastri. P3 was Lando Norris. P2 was Max Verstappen with a 112 dead. And in P1 with a 112 dead as well. But he set the time first. That was George Russell in the Mercedes. Cody, big thoughts on the qualifying session?
It was a very exciting session. I was astounded that both Ferraris were out before Q3, especially based on our predictions. We were both predicting, I think, Leclerc and Sainz on the podium. They were off to a really rough start here, not making it to Q3. I think after the performance in Monaco that everyone was expecting great things from them, and it didn't happen. Also, amazing that Max Verstappen and George Russell finished with the same time in Q3, down to the 1,000th of the second. I believe the pundits were saying that this is only the second time in Formula One history that this has happened since they went to the three decimal places for qualifying. So definitely an oddity. And yeah, George Russell comes out on top because he set the time first, which blew me out of the water. We haven't seen any strong performance really from Mercedes so far this year. And here comes George Russell with the second pole of his career.
Yeah, and I get the initial shock at seeing the Mercedes, but I go back to kind of the beginning of the year and where everybody's strengths kind of were. And Mercedes was always really good in the slow speed corners, and Canada has a lot of slow speed corners. The problem that they've had is they haven't been able to put their package together. They've had a lot of inconsistencies throughout their running. Like they have one session where they're good and then another session where they weren't. They did bring a new front wing to this race. They finally were able to deploy it. They did not run it at all on Friday because Friday was tricky, changeable conditions, and they didn't want to crash it and break it and not be able to use it. But Saturday, for the most part, was fairly dry. The qualifying ended up being pretty dry as well. So that enabled them to put the new front wing on both the cars, and the cars seemed to respond pretty good. They were tops in FP3 in the morning running. Lewis Hamilton had set down just a hell of a lap in FP3 there. So we knew the Mercedes were here to play, and they were definitely a factor. It's kind of surprising that Lewis only managed to get P7 out of it, especially given that form in FP3. But, there's Russell, and he was, I think, probably the fastest in the overall dry and qualifying trim, just able to eke out that little bit. He actually sets the pole lap time on a used set of soft tires. So they all came in for new sets of soft tires at the end, and nobody other than, I think, Lando from old to new was able to improve. So it just kind of ended up working that way. Max does improve, gets to the 112.000, but he sets it later than George does, so Russell gets the pole. I think it's the first time that's happened since Jacques Villeneuve, Michael Schumacher, and Heinz-Harald Frentzen all did it. Three cars with identical lap times. So if you're Heinz-Harald Frentzen, you had to be kind of pissed at that one because he has the top time, but he's not even on the front row. How does that work? But that's the way that rule goes through. We do have to talk a little bit about the Ferraris, and the Ferrari decision desk, which had gone away for a long time under Fred Vasseur, seemed to be back and seemed to be making some not great calls. Charles Leclerc definitely venting some frustration over the radio after being eliminated in Q2, saying, we'll talk about it after I get back to the garage. He obviously didn't want to throw anybody under the bus live on television, but it definitely sounded like they either didn't give him the gap he needed in order to set a clean lap, or he was on the wrong tire at the wrong time. It sounded like they set him back out on a second run in Q2 on a used set and unable to improve because of it.
Yeah, it was very poor performance from them. Like I said before, crazy that they didn't make it to Q3 after the Monaco performance. Also crazy that Sergio Perez didn't even make it to Q2. He's got that new 2-year deal that we talked about before, and we were kind of questioning it at the time, saying, does this performance really lately, or even over the last couple of years, does it really warrant the 2 years? And the contract at this point was looking worse by the day because, it didn't make it into Q2, starting from the back again. As we all know, starting from the back is bad enough, but as we got to the race and we saw that it was still going to be wet, changeable conditions at the start, you're putting yourself in an awful place to have an incident going into the first couple laps of the race. He's not doing himself any favors right now, and the criticism that's being thrown his way is ramping up.
Yeah, for sure. And it's only going to get worse when we get to the race and we talk about how he exited said race, and the late night that the stewards ended up having also ended up costing one Sergio Perez. We will talk about that when we get to the backmarkers in just a little bit. But my last point before moving on into the race itself, I would just like to know what the heck is impeding. Because how does Yuki Tsunoda get away with that, what he did to Oscar Piastri there? I understand the Lewis Hamilton aspect of it. He really wasn't in his way. But Oscar was on a real flyer of a lap. He had set almost a purple first sector and had to throw that away, and it almost put him out in Q1 because of it. It's just one of those things. I don't think we have good definitions of what that is and what it isn't, because sometimes I see penalties and other times I don't, so I don't understand it
You're
anymore.
expecting consistency from the stewarding?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I should know better. But anyway, all right, we will leave that there. You had another fun little FIA lack of decision, or it was a quick decision. They ruled on it fast. At least they did that. But it was a very interesting qualifying session. I ended up consuming it kind of from a rest stop on my way back. So I had made decent time coming back from northern Wisconsin, and I had thought in my head the qualifying was going to start at 3:30. And thank God the McLaren app on my phone pings T-minus less than 30 minutes to qualifying, and my phone lights up, and I just happened to look down, and I went, wait a minute, it's 3, not 3:30. Oh, I need to find a spot. All right, where can I pull over? So I ended up hooking up my hotspot, hooking up my iPad, watched it basically from the driver's side of my car. So that was probably the most unique time I've ever experienced trying to watch qualifying session. But it was well worth it. I was glad that I did it. It didn't cost me a whole lot of extra time getting home. So I was happy to take the hour out in order to do that. But hopefully I'll never have to do that again, because that was a little...
I applaud your dedication to doing that. Getting like a setup.
I would have been distracted as a driver. I would have been focused on that and not what I was doing. So I thought, safety first, get off the road, watch the thing, know what happens, and be good for there. But it was a very fascinating qualifying session. But anyway, we will now move into this fascinating Sunday race. And we will start, as we are apt to do, with the back markers. And we have a bunch of non-classified finishers here. It starts with the number 2 of Logan Sargent. He did not finish. He caused the first safety car, which we're definitely going to talk about. The other non-finisher, Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, battling engine gremlins basically from the drop, from lights out. So he had a very rough race. He ended up retiring. They even tried to put him on some slick tires. We'll talk about him in a minute. Sergio Checo Perez. Yeah, the weekend that just kept getting worse and worse and worse the longer it went. Not only does he not finish the race, he also has picked up a 3-place grid penalty for the next race. So he will now have a grid drop on the next race because he was operating his car in what the FIA deemed was an unsafe position. After his incident, they wanted him to park the car. He did trundle it back to the pits. They didn't like the fact that he spewed some debris and caused the safety car to go longer. So they came down, and also Red Bull gets fined, I think, €25,000 or something like that. So kind of crazy. Unfortunate non-finisher here, Alex Albon in the Williams, who was having one of his better races in the Williams. He had an overtake that was just absolutely amazing. It's probably going to go down as the pass of the season up to this point. So he gets caught up in an incident with Carlos Sainz after he had a spin and was just kind of the unfortunate collector. He got collected up in it and wasn't able to continue. Classified finishers in the back markers here. P15, Zhao Guanyu was the last guy on the track. He does finish a lap down. P14 was Yuki Tsunoda, who was running well, and then he had an incident of his own. And P13 was Valtteri Bottas. Kept it clean, but anywhere near the points as the Kick Sauber pain, and this painful season continues for them. So, Cody, big thoughts here in the back markers. Where'd you like to start?
There's a lot to choose from. I guess let's start with Charles Leclerc, who, his qualifying was poor, but the day just got worse for him on race day because he, as you said, he started off with engine issues right out of the get-go. He was losing, his engineer said, about half a second down the straights. It's going to lose you all kinds of positions, even when it's wet and there's no DRS. He's falling back. He finally goes in for a pit stop, and they decide, I think what they did was that they did a full electronics reboot at that point, which they thought fixed the engine issue based on what they were saying on the radio. But they also decided they were going to go for broke, and they put him on slicks, which was a little too early. And I believe they had to then the slicks weren't working. They had to pit him again. And yeah, by that point, he's a lap down. Engine might be working, but he's already screwed out of the race. And eventually they just had him retire the car because they figured no sense in leaving you out there in the changeable conditions where you could potentially wreck things, and you're not going to score any points anyway. So yeah, he had a really rough day. You could tell his frustration talking on the radio as far back as when he had the engine issues. His engineer said he was losing a lot of time on the straights, but Charles got mad at him because he's like, no, I don't want to hear that answer. I want to know specifically how much time am I losing. And so, yeah, it looks like there's still some frustration between him and the team, but understandable after a weekend like this, after coming off of the high of winning Monaco.
Yeah, I mean, the lack of Ferrari pace was, quite frankly, to me, just shocking, just all the way around. Like, that was not what I would have anticipated. Monaco is all slow speed corners. Canada is a lot of slow speed corners. I would expect if you were good in Monaco, you would probably be good in Canada, which is why, as interesting as the Russell pole was, I wasn't totally shocked by it because, again, I would expect that the Mercedes would be good in the slow speed corners. If they could just manage to keep it going from one session to the next, they were finally able to do that here, which was good for them. And if that's a harbinger of things to come, hey, here's a fourth team with a crack at it, coming back into the fight here. This is all what we want. So that was very good and exciting to see. Charles, that's a new race engineer. So I'm not surprised that they're still kind of getting through their own program, still trying to figure out, how they're going to work hand in hand and in tandem. So, yeah, I mean, it was just unfortunate. They just, bad day at the office and kind of a bad time to have a bad day because they score no points. Their rivals scored lots of points, including Red Bull, who now pull pretty clear of them in the constructors. But, it's a yo-yo, and, it could just as easily in the next round turn right back around for them. So I don't think they're in. This isn't a panic race. This is probably a one-off weekend that just didn't work well for them. Yeah, Leclerc had a problem, and then Sainz ended up crashing out after he had a slip and a spin, dry to wet patches, and collected the unfortunate collector of Alex Albon, who, I mean, the pass he makes on, Ricardo and Alonso.
Something like that. Maybe I think it was an Alpine, but yeah.
Well, okay, Ricardo was one of them, and maybe it was Ricardo and Gasly or something like that. That was just absolutely an amazing moment, and it was fun to watch.
Yeah, that was an astounding pass, chef's kiss, all that good stuff. I think they're going into a chicane. He moves around the outside of the first car heading into the chicane, and then heading into that first turn of the chicane, dives down the inside of the other car, and yeah, gets 2-1. It was fantastic driving on his part, and it just made it all the worse when he got collected in that accident that was no fault of his own. He was on for a really great day, and it just didn't come to him. Didn't come to either Williams. So we had double DNF for Ferrari. We had double DNF for Williams. Logan Sargent was having a bad day of his own. He has a spin earlier on, manages to get the car going again, and then has a worse spin where can't get the car going again. It's damaged. And that safety car that came out due to him being out on track, really, there were several points in this race that changed the complexion of the end. But this first safety car that was caused by Logan Sargent retiring from the race really put a big damper on, I believe this was the one that kind of screwed over Norris, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so we should probably kind of reset the stage as to what was happening at the front while all of this is going on, of course, in the back. So Russell leads off the line. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is we've been sometimes pretty critical on this show of race control for not firing the cars off in wet conditions. Sometimes they'll do a rolling safety car start. They'll go around for 7, 8, 9 laps and then, do a rolling start, not a standing start. And, nobody wants to try to let each other duke themselves out in the wet. That didn't happen here. So kudos to the race director for making the call, either because the rain had stopped, and the track was good enough for however we got there. They let the cars go on a standing start in pretty wet conditions. So Russell actually leads. It looked like they were crawling off the line, actually. I think was what David Croft had said on the broadcast. But Russell leads off the line, looked like he was kind of controlling the race early. In the meantime, Lando Norris had dropped back about maybe 6-7 seconds and was really, really going into kind of a tire safe mode to try to preserve the inters. He was already looking offline, trying to cool the tires wherever he could early on, even before his race engineer. There was, I know, a certain time when his engineer comes on the radio and says, you might want to look after the tires. And he goes, mate, I've been doing that since 10 laps ago, and it was lap 11. So he had been doing that from the beginning. But as we now transitioned into drier conditions, the dry line was forming. The sun had even come out at a certain point. So, now it was really drying. We learned that in FP1, that, this track, while it can get really wet, would also get really dry fast. So the conditions were definitely coming to Norris and the McLarens. Both he and Piastri were ding-donging fastest laps while they're bringing this gap down. Norris gets ahead of Max Verstappen with a really nice overtake. He then gets ahead of George Russell with another nice overtake, basically two cars in the same lap, puts him up to P1, and now the gap is opening. It opens all the way at one point, even to 8 or 9 seconds. Now, when he overtook Russell, Russell had a moment where he had to go off in that last chicane by the Wall of Champions there, tried to re-enter, but he had lost so much momentum that Verstappen had overtaken Russell. So now it's Norris in front of Verstappen. Meanwhile, like I said, that gap continues to grow. It grows to like 8.5 and almost 9 seconds. Sargent has his incident, and now there's double yellows for a while, and now there's the safety car. Unlike what happened in Miami, where Norris was in front of the safety car when it came out, that did not happen here. He's coming up on the pit entrance. He gets one board where it flashed safety car in order to try to decide whether or not he was going to box. McLaren weren't sure exactly what they wanted to really do in that situation, so I think they just elected to keep him out because it was probably the safer option. But of course, then everybody else sees Norris not boxing. They know more rain is coming, so Verstappen and Russell and pretty much everybody behind all pit. So Norris now is picked up by the safety car. I think it's in turn 5. He comes around. Now, he still has a pretty big gap because, meanwhile, these pit stops are not fast because they're they're under safety car, and 2, they're rain tires to rain tires. So they're not as efficient as they could have been, dry to dry. At one point, the gap is almost like 30 seconds, but because the safety car is going slower than the delta times are, Norris is stuck behind the safety car. The gap comes down to about, I think, right around 18 seconds, and that's right at that tipping point. Can you get a stop in, you change your tires, and get out on time? Norris ends up dropping from P1 to P3 in that sequence there. So because of this, the ironic thing was Logan Sargent caused an incident. Well, didn't cause it. It was Magnussen that caused it, and Logan was part of it. In Miami, that gave Norris the win. It looked like it kind of worked the opposite here. Even at that point, I wasn't super upset about it. I was a little annoyed, but I still thought, well, okay, now he's on new winners. We're going to go into that same drying line where they were really, really fast. I thought that they were going to have more opportunities to come. It was really close, but this is definitely inflection point number 1 caused by Logan Sargent.
Yeah, this was a rough one on Lando because at this point in the race, I'm thinking, wow, he's got a legitimate shot at winning this one, opening up the gap there. And yeah, the safety car timing was perfectly bad for him because once again, safety car gets called right as he's coming around to, the entrance to the pits. And I guess we don't know for sure how things would have played out differently if he had pit there. Would have had fresh tires for sure. Would he have lost track position? Would the other guys have stayed out? We don't know. But I think it was a little bit of a dropped ball by McLaren. I think that the double yellows were out for a pretty long time, where it looked like Logan Sargent wasn't going to get going again, and that a safety car was imminent. And I think they had enough time to make the call for him to come in at that point, which I think would have been a better decision. He ended up coming in and pitting and losing his track position anyway. So, yeah, I think a little bit of a drop ball on them. I think they should have made that call a little bit quicker, seeing as the safety car was imminent.
I mean, it was kind of fascinating to hear the discussion during the lap. Normally, when Lando thinks that they've screwed it up, he's usually pretty demonstrative on the radio. He was actually of the opinion that he thought it was going to be more slicks than inters at that point, but then he gets the call that, hey, everyone else is pitted for inters, and he literally asks at one point, I think halfway around the lap, unless you're sure it's going to rain, I think it's slicks. And then, of course, it then started to rain, and he literally goes, oh, well, my bad. Can't do anything about it. All right, I guess we're going to box for inters. So, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right in that he gets notification of the double waved yellow when he's in the hairpin. So he does, the team did have about maybe 10, 15 seconds to really make the call. He only has one. I actually went back and watched it because I was like, when I saw it live, there's certain issues with the onboards and the timing of the radio transmissions, just because radio signals have to move back and forth and they have to get filtered and all that other stuff when they come to you. So you see the image before you hear the radio transmission. So when you watch it on the onboard, it sounds like they're asking him if he wants to box after he's already passed the pit lane. Mm-hmm. That's what I heard. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. How could he have even done that? When I went back and watched it, he has one indicator board that said safety car before he could have made it to the pits. So he would have had to basically just kind of made the call himself to say, I'm just coming in, new inter. Given the nature of the chatter that they would have had, I don't think it would have been a clean pit stop, because I don't think they would have been ready for either slicks or an inter, because they hadn't really made up their mind yet. So, yeah, post is always going to be 2020. You can always look at this and go, could we have done this or should we have done that? I think in the moment, it was probably the decision that it was, and it just kind of worked out that way. Yeah, he got the benefit of it in Miami on a weird kind of safety car thing. This is a weird safety car thing that kind of went against him. Even all that being said, I still felt he was in the fight. There's another inflection point that we're going to talk about where we thought he still really was in the fight. So, yeah, I think it's just kind of one of those things that happened, but it was the Williams of Logan Sargent that kind of brought it out. Mm-hmm. So I guess we'll kind of leave the back markers there. The runner back markers, Zhao, had a terrible pit stop. Kick Sauber, bad pit stop. Gremlin comes up again. Yuki Tsunoda was having a good race, and then he had a spin, was able to get going, but that dropped him out of the points. And Valtteri was just kind of there. He really didn't do much. I didn't see him light up either on timing or anything else. So, yeah, just kind of a more pain for the Kick Sauber as they remain, as we'll talk about, the only team to not score a point yet this season. But we will move into the midfield, where there was definitely lots of drama going on here throughout the course of this race. P12, we have to talk about the Haas's, and the Haas's early for sure. Kevin Magnussen and P11, Nico Hulkenberg. P10 was Esteban Ocon. P9 was Pierre Gasly. So double points for Alpine. Look at that. P8 in had to have been one of his better weekends throughout the course of the season for sure, from even start to finish. Daniel Ricciardo in the V-Carb, I thought drove with purpose this weekend, and we'll kind of talk about why in a little bit. P7, local boy did good. I guess Lance Stroll in the Aston Martin made Q3, made us all look really stupid when it comes to predictions. So tricky changeable conditions, this is where he does really well. So good on him for that. P6 was Fernando Alonso. So both Aston Martins, given where their form has been, definitely this was an improvement. P5 was Oscar Piastri. He had a very eventful race as well. And P4, Lewis Hamilton. P4, despite the fact he called it after the race one of the worst races he's ever ran in his career. So I guess he was being a very hard self-critic there. But Cody, big thoughts here in the midfield.
So starting with the Haas's at the beginning of the race, they decided that they were going to go with a different strategy. Everyone else in the field is on inters, and they decide they're going to try the full wets. And in the past, for a while now, nobody likes the full wets. They say they're awful. We joke about them being, oversized paperweights. They're not fast. Nobody likes to use them. And they decided they were going to go with that anyway. And I thought, oh, okay, like you're kind of near, you're, what do you got to lose? You're Haas here. You're, known for kind of doing off strategy to try to, squeeze out some luck. And for the first bunch of laps there, they looked like geniuses because they were flying. Kevin Magnussen passed like 7 cars or something like that within the first 2 laps. He was on a mission, and Nico Hulkenberg was not
11 cars.
11?
When he pitted, he was third. It's 11 cars in the first 7 laps.
Yeah, so he was flying, and it looked great. Like I messaged you that they made a stellar call, but the problem was, and you mentioned this earlier, is that there wasn't really a whole lot of rain coming down at that point. It was actually getting sunny, and the track was drying up really quickly. So the issue that they ran into is the track got dry enough where the wet performance fell off, and it was still, in Inter's track at that point. They weren't far enough into the, tire cycle to, be at the point where they were going to be pitting at the same time as everyone else. So unfortunately, they bring in Kevin Magnussen to switch over to the Inters once his performance on the full wet started to drop off, and he had a really bad pit stop, a slow one. I think we were past 10 seconds on that one, or 8 seconds, or it was
something like 8.5 seconds.
It was
they were not they just weren't ready for him on the pit wall to come in.
Bad stop. Pretty much lost everything that he gained by taking that full wet strategy, which was a bit of a shame. I'm not sure that being that he had to pit that earlier, that it would have ultimately come out to be a great call at the end anyway. But it did make for some great excitement in those opening laps, just seeing him like flying through the field like nobody's business. Nico Hulkenberg was doing quite well in the full wets, not quite as well as Magnussen, but they decided that they were going to kind of split the strategy, and they left Nico out there for a long time after on the full wets. He had a pretty good train that formed up behind him, and once they started going by, you could tell that it wasn't the best call to leave him out that long on the full wets.
Yeah, I almost wanted to message you back, except was just so riveted by everything else. I'm like, I almost wanted to message you back, like, just wait for it, ... Like, I kept thinking in my mind, it's like, this is great until, and I think it was lap 6 where I finally went, oh, no, that's not going to work anymore. It was a great call early. And to kind of quote a baseball parlance, what Magnussen did was like a deep fly ball to the warning track. They did everything but the end. If they had just been ready with the pit stop, it could have worked out and been a genius call to do it, because he was right. Magnussen's instincts were absolutely right when the tipping point of the full wets versus the inners was coming on. He knew it. He made the right call. It was just the team wasn't ready. I hadn't gone back and watched his onboard. I want to do that. I'm going to go do that because I want to find out exactly, did he call it? Did the team call it? Somebody dropped the ball there. So the 8.5 seconds gave up a lot of the margin that he had gained. But yeah, if you're Haas, what else do you have to lose by doing that? They were 14th, and before the 2-kick Saubers go back into a pit lane start, Hulkenberg was 19th. You have nothing to lose there. What are you going to do? You're going to drop behind the guys at the pit lane start at the start of the race. So I applaud the idea. This is, again, under, I think, Ayo Kodamatsu, it's classic Haas. This is what I would say is a classic Haas. Throw it the dart at the dartboard, see if it sticks. it damn near worked for them. It was just kind of a shame that it didn't. Like I said, like you get it all the way to the warning track, you just didn't get it over the fence there. But it was interesting and certainly some drama early for sure. All right, moving on from the two Haas's, we should talk about the two Alpines who I thought had an eventful day. Esteban Ocon, who I think had to start from somewhere outside of the Montreal suburbs, given all the grid drops that he had. He ends up getting a point after all of that, and Pierre Gasly ends up getting a 2 points. So double points for Alpine. Normally a track that you wouldn't think that would suit them, but they managed to pull it off here.
Yeah, they were. I would say they, as a lot of drivers did here, they definitely got a little bit lucky with things like poor performance from Ferrari, the Albon retirement, Yuki Tsunoda having a spin. They definitely had some help getting there into the top 10, but that's how it goes sometimes. They kept it on track. They for the whole race, which was not an easy feat, as we saw. We were going from wet to dry line to back to wet to back to dry. So it's changing around. You're having to go offline into the wet to keep the intermediate tires in the appropriate temperature. And once you're on the slicks, you're doing everything you can to stay in that little dry line. It was a real tough one for the drivers who had to stay focused the entire time, not miss a beat. So yeah, I guess luck was on their side, but they still had to make it happen. So really good performance from Alpine.
Yep. Another guy who hasn't had a whole lot of good things happen to him this year, but Danny Rick in the V-Carb comes home P8. Probably had some extra motivation given who was on the Sky commentary. I have an award for that gentleman. We'll get to that in a little bit. I never liked that guy. But anyway, it's a long-standing rant for a lot of reasons, and I don't know why people listen to that guy, but he ends up popping up when whatever. But anyway, good on Danny Rick to come home P8 in a crazy race for the V-Carb team. We kind of talked about the Aston Martins. I thought solid. Definitely not in the fight at the front, but solid kind of races kind of on their own. But a bit of a recovery from where they've been for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fun watching Fernando Alonso hold up Lewis Hamilton for a little while there. Seeing the two of the greats in the sport going at it a little bit again, even for just a little while. Speaking of Lewis Hamilton, it's surprising to hear that he said it was one of his worst races because he was this close to being on the podium. Overall, Mercedes had a refreshingly good weekend here in Canada. And yeah, you could say in qualifying, Lewis did not perform nearly as well as Russell, but in the race, I thought he was holding his own quite well. And there was a brief period there with just a couple laps left where he did get by George and was, sitting in P3 looking like he could get the podium. Obviously, George ended up getting back by him, so it was not meant to be. But P4 was, no bad performance in my book. Maybe he's just feeling like he could have had it with better qualifying, or maybe let George go a little too easily there at the end. But I thought he did great. P4 is nothing to sneeze at. Yeah,
I would kind of say that now. Normally we would break in the midfield and just do the podium, but I think the top five were kind of the contenders, as was revealed kind of by the conditions, and they all kind of went at each other throughout the course of this race. So Piastri comes home the least of them in P5 after getting passed by both Russell and Hamilton after they had boxed on the second safety car, which was caused by the Sainz and Albon incident. Before that, we'll get back to the front a little bit, but that ended up meaning that Hamilton and Russell were on basically significantly younger tires, almost 10 to 15 laps, younger tires than Piastri, who just couldn't hold it kind of at the end. Nice clean moves from both Russell and Hamilton. Well, clean move by Hamilton, not so much by Russell. The Russell-Piastri thing was actually referred to the stewards. No further action was taken after the stewards took a very long time. somebody gave these stewards some really nice Canadian dinner, because the race ends in the early afternoon, and it was only an hour before we started recording that we finally got the final classifications and all that from those stewards. So they must have had a really nice spread at that casino on the Ile de Notre Dame there. But anyway, yeah, I mean, Piastri and Russell had lots of coming together. They had the one coming together for sure. Russell and Norris had a few exchanges back and forth, given where they were. And Norris and Verstappen had a couple throughout the course of the race as well. So it was unpredictable. So where we kind of left the fight at the front off was right after the first safety car. Now Norris is in third. Verstappen had taken over the lead of the race. We go through that period of rain again. Now we go through another drying cycle. What ends up happening is when we get to the crossover point between slicks and now inters, Verstappen boxes, Russell boxes, Norris stays out for basically 2 extra laps to try to build a gap, and he almost pulled it off. I think the gap needed to be maybe a half a second longer, and if turn 1 wasn't wet when Norris comes out, or as wet as it was, he may have been able to slip in front of Max for at least a little bit there, and we could have seen what would have happened, but he had no grip on those tires in that wet condition. Didn't spin the car out, fortunately. He caught it, but that enabled Max to get back in the lead. Russell actually does overtake Norris on that same lap later on, coming back to the start-finish line. But then Russell has a moment in one of the turn 5-6 chicanes and bobbled it, goes off the track. That enabled Norris to get back around him. And so now it's Norris versus Verstappen for the win. There is another safety car that we talked about. That was the Sainz and Albon incident. But after the safety car, Max just was the better driver and the better car in the full dry conditions, and he was able to open up a gap to 2, 3, 4 seconds comfortably, even though he was kind of complaining about it on the radio. But Max was able to bring it home. But it was a very intense watch for sure amongst these top 5. If we can have this through the rest of the season, we're going to have some fun.
Yeah, I hope that this is a sign that Mercedes is making a little bit of a comeback, because if they're back in the mix, now we're up to 4 teams that are legitimately competing for podiums, if not wins. When that crossover from the intermediates to the slicks was happening, I was on the edge of my seat, because Lando stays out, and I was thinking, ooh, I don't know if that's the right call. And then he goes around that lap, and he's still setting fastest laps of the race. And I was thinking, like, oh, maybe they're really on something here. And he doesn't pit again. He goes out the second time, and the gap looked like it was continuing to open up there. And I was thinking, man, this is really, really on. He's going to come out in front of Max. But during the second half of that lap, it looked like the gap closed up just a little bit. And yeah, Lando comes out onto track just in front of Max, but he's on, as you said, the wet part of the turn there was pretty much still the wettest part of the track. And you could tell the grip wasn't there yet. He was sliding around, wobbling around, and Max could spy him pretty easily. Yeah, it's another point in the race for Lando where you wonder what might have been. First one is what might have been if he had been able to pit right when the safety car came out, and at this point is what might have been if maybe he pitted a lap earlier. Would he have had just enough gap at that point to get the tires going and be able to shut the door on Max? It's just a whole big story of what could have been for Lando. But I would say, despite all that, P2, very well-deserved position for him. Russell had a great race of his own. P3, podium. He's got to feel real great about that. I will say that I thought that George, maybe out of all the front runners, had the most clumsy moments during the race. I would say he did have a few times where he went off at inopportune times early in the race when Lando gets by him, he went off, and that allowed Max to get by as well. They did almost, I think they referred that to, or the stewards noted it because they thought maybe he was rejoining the track in an unsafe manner. I ended up dropping that one, but a couple clumsy moments for George, but a P3 still a fantastic result.
Yeah, I mean, that's nothing to, given where their form has been. This, if you're a Mercedes fan, you have to be encouraged by what you saw. Of course, over the course of the weekend, the speed was the most consistent that it has been that I've seen them all year. The new front wing definitely appears to be working. The only question I have with them, because they've been so inconsistent, is this consistency a Canada-specific track thing that doesn't translate to other places, or does now this translate somewhere else? We're going to Spain next. That's a track that everybody knows really well. That's where they used to all do their testing. If they are on it there, I think now you have a fourth team in the merry-go-round as to who might end up winning races throughout the course of the year. I was also, what was it? I think I said, I'm getting kind of an inverse 2012 vibe where unfortunately, everybody who's in the P2 position seems to be changing around a little bit, or there's another team that pops up and another team pops up. Meanwhile, because Verstappen has the lead in the championship, he's just going to be able to, to kind of ride that all the way to the end. But, hey, he had himself a good drive today too. Always really good in the wet, Max Verstappen. Clearly, definitely the better of the two Red Bull drivers on the day. That goes without saying. Yeah, I would say he earned this one. This one was a fight. He was not the comfortable 20 seconds in front that we've seen. I think those days, I think we can almost safely say those days appear to be gone. Doesn't mean that Max isn't going to continue to win races. It's not going to be that Max is probably still going to win the championship. I mean, let's just be brutally honest about it. He has the math advantage at this point, even though we have lots of races to go. So that is the one thing you can kind of hold your hat on is there's still chances there, but he's definitely way up in the math department, and that's a big thing for him. But I don't think we're going to see, unless Red Bull just nail a setup, the day of the 15, 18-second gap anymore.
Mm-hmm. And that is a good thing.
Absolutely. That's a great thing. So, yeah, it was a fascinating, fun, intense Canadian Grand Prix. If you hadn't watched it, I would highly suggest that you do, even though we just told you everything that happened. But go watch it again. It's definitely worth a rewatch. But anyway, we're going to take a quick break. We'll recap what this did to all of those standings. Ferrari in now some pain, but are they still okay in the drivers and the constructors? Come on back. We'll fill you in on all that. We'll open it up to your reaction to what you saw today, the fan email segment. We'll hand out some awards. We'll talk about predictions. I'm never picking Ferrari again when it comes to predictions because, ouch. That's all I'm going to say. But come on back. We'll get into all of it in just a little bit. You are listening to the Outlap F1 podcast, and we'll be right back after this quick pit stop. Grab your flu powder, broomstick, or apparate to your favorite audio streaming service to join the discussion on Hogwarts, a podcast, where Dan and his friends have in-depth chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of each Harry Potter novel. Join the group as they dive into the magical world and discuss plot points, analyze character development, and occasionally go off the rails. Whether you're a muggle who's new to the series or a pure-blood wizard who won't need a remember-all, Hogwarts, a podcast, brings everyone to the Great Hall for a magical discussion. Hogwarts, a podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back in. This is Season 6. This is Episode 21 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2024 Canadian Grand Prix race review. You've got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight, and we just wrapped up the actual Canadian, a very intense review of a very intense race, the Canadian GP. So we're going to recap where all the standings shake out after this round of the F1 Championship. So Cody, tell us about the drivers, and I'll chime in with the teams.
All right, so not much has changed at the tippy top. Max Verstappen still leading the point standings for Red Bull. He opens up his gap quite a bit on Charles Leclerc after this race, considering he got 25 points and Charles Leclerc got nothing. Max sitting at the top with 194 points. However, Charles Leclerc is still in second place with Ferrari, back at 138 points. So a pretty good gap between the two of them now. Lando Norris, though, making really good points in this race. He is hot on Leclerc's heels now. He's in third place with McLaren at 131 points, only 7 points back. Carlos Sainz, also someone who did not get any points this weekend, unfortunately. He is in fourth for Ferrari with 108 points. And Sergio Perez back in fifth place now for Red Bull at 107. He might have actually been right there after Monaco as well, come to think of it, because Perez did not get any points this weekend either. So a lot of high up drivers here not scoring any points this weekend. Sixth place, Oscar Piastri in the other McLaren at 81 points. So still a bit of a gap there between Perez and Piastri, but he is catching up. Seventh place, George Russell, really good points this weekend for Mercedes. He's at 69 points, and his teammate Lewis Hamilton in the other Mercedes is in eighth place with 55 points. Ninth place, Fernando Alonso hanging in there with the Aston Martin at 41 points. And then Yuki Tsunoda is rounding out the top 10 in that V-Carb car with 19 points.
Yeah, the recently now extended Yuki Tsunoda, who gets a 1-year extension onto his V-Carb contract. That broke in the middle of, I think I was between towns in Wisconsin somewhere. So I didn't get a chance to really talk about it. But in the constructors, after this round, Red Bull Racing Powertrains opens up the gap with Ferrari not scoring any points. They are now up to 301 points. Ferrari remain on 252 for the season. P3 is McLaren. They are pulled to within 40 points of P2, so that gap has come down quite a bit now. They check in with 212 points. P4 is Mercedes on 124. P5, Aston Martin in kind of a area of their own. They are on 58 points. P6 is the Red Bull, is the V-Carb team. They check in with 28 points. The battle for P7 is now going to be quite interesting. So Haas check in with 7 points. They did not score today, but those double points for Alpine moves them up one position ahead of now Williams. So they check in with 5 points. Williams maintains the 2 points. The Alex Albon retirement, definitely a painful pill to swallow for Williams. And Kick Sauber continues to push up the bottom of the timesheets here with 0 points on the season. All right, so you have heard our takes on what we saw during the course of this weekend. We're now going to open it up to your takes on what you saw over the course of the weekend. It's the fan email segment. Rachel Fleming, the trooper that she is, chimed in right away again. We've got our normal people who are on here, including a late addition from Mr. Formula. I was glad to get your stuff in. Cody, as they say, it's your time to shine. What do we got?
All right, our first fan email comes in from Rachel Fleming. Thank you, Rachel. And she says, well, that was a race and a half, wasn't it? I don't really mind Max winning so much as it was a decent race. I did try my Twitter curse of saying Max would win the race, and it didn't work this time. Saturday was difficult for Ferrari. That was nothing compared to Sunday. I'm surprised they were as persistent as they were with Charles's car, though putting on hards on his car was a really bad move. Gutted for Alex Albon after such a great race. His double overtake was excellent. I would like to say that I did burst out laughing when I saw Perez's rear wing, but I'm surprised that he was allowed to crawl back to the pits. But I suppose Red Bull was trying to avoid a safety car. Then Sainz, a few seconds later, gets his revenge on Red Bull, giving Perez that contract, though taking out Albon was unfair. But a few podcasts ago, the Formula said that he had got off the Logan Sargent hype train. Well, I am joining the Logan Sargent train, I am joining the Logan Sargent won't last the season hype train. There we go. I need to put it all together there. I think the gap between him and Albon is too much now, and with the constructors so tight, I think Williams should do something at least during the summer. So lots of good points there. Yeah, trying the max curse, I suppose that's a good point. I think I probably, at this point, like I'm well settled in the fact that I am a Max Verstappen fan. That said, after last season, despite being a Max Verstappen fan, I find it much more exciting to see literally anybody else win for the moment. So I was really rooting for Lando this one. I think he had as good a shot as anybody. It was really bad for the Ferraris. I agree with you that I thought that they were going to retire Charles much more quickly. I thought that they were going to with him dropping through the field with those with that engine issue. I figured they were going to retire him, but they must have known that something like an electronics reboot could maybe fix the problem, and maybe that's why they were sticking to it for so long. Yep, we already talked about that Alex Albon overtake. That was amazing. And it is really too bad that he got taken out by Sainz. But that is just how it goes sometimes. As Andy said, Perez wasn't really allowed to crawl back to the pits with his wing like that. He ended up getting a penalty in form of a grid drop for the next race for doing that. So it did come back around to bite him. And as far as Logan Sargent goes, I think I pretty much have already said my piece on this several times. That yes, you think he seems like a nice guy, friendly guy, but he's just and it's really really nice having an American driver in the sport because it's been a long time since that happened, and I thought maybe he would do better than some of the more recent from Formula One American drivers that came before him. But alas, it doesn't seem like he's got the chops, at least at this point in time. And it's been at this point for a while where, you see him spin out at the back and you're like, oh, he did it again. Like it just keeps happening over and over again. He is not close to Albon at all in terms of the performance there. And I think they'll probably keep him on for the rest of the season. That's what my gut's telling me. But he's totally toast after this season.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems it's fait accompli. We talked about it in our preview episode that the merry-go-round has to kick some certain people out of it, and I think he's the most obvious one at this point. Due to the results, the lack of results. He was having himself a really interesting, good weekend, and he throws it away on like the second lap because either he was too ambitious and thought there was more grip on his tires than he had, or for whatever reason couldn't come to grips with the grip levels or something like that. But when you spin by yourself, there really isn't anybody else to blame, so I can't throw it anywhere else other than back on him. I think his future is probably in somebody's test program. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up making a transition somewhere in a sports car program where he can kind of be part of a team, not necessarily be all on his own. I still think he's going to have a racing career beyond Formula One. I do think there's endemic talent there. I mean, I saw it in F2. It's just not working for him in Formula One. And as I've said many times, this was kind of the worst case scenario where he's coming into a team that, it has some funding, but had a lot of issues. We've talked about the various issues that Williams have had to deal with. And, when you don't have confidence in the car, you don't have confidence as a driver. And this is what you see. You see a guy who's constantly in between. And this is what happens. So, it sucks for him personally, because I do think he's a nice guy. I don't think this is the end of his career, but I do think it's the end of his Formula One ambition for sure, at least for now. He's going to have to rebuild his persona, rebuild his brand in a lot of ways to try to make a comeback, if it is even possible at this point. I don't know if it necessarily is. But Rachel, I kind of agree with a lot of your other points here. Yeah, I'm gutted for Alex Albon too. The double overtake was, like I said, overtake of the first part of the season, at least, if not going to be overtake of the year. That was great stuff. There's a racing car driver in that guy. If Williams can get the car and it's feeling like Carlos Sainz may be his teammate next year, and apparently we're going to hear confirmation at the Spanish Grand Prix of whatever the decision is. I've read a lot of the rumor mill about that, so that will make the Williams situation a lot clearer. And I think you're going to get your wish when it comes to Logan Sargent not being in the Williams anymore, Rachel.
Yep. Thank you again, Rachel. Our next email comes from Dave Doherty. And thank you, Dave. He says, "Hi, team. A question for you both. What was going on with Ferrari? How could they have messed this up? Was it the track, or do you think they had incorrect setup? And also, what were your thoughts on Haas starting on the full wets when everyone was on inters? Was it appropriate for Haas to do that?" At the time, as we discussed, I think it was an awesome decision for Haas to put on the full wets. Had there been more rain and had the race stayed at that wetness level, like, they would have looked fantastic. And like I said, like geniuses, because they, especially Magnussen, were just flying through the field. And as you said, Andy, the call by Magnussen, or the team, or whoever made that call for when he was going to come in to switch the inters, was well timed, and we might have seen him at least gain a little bit from having started on the full wets. So I think it was a good decision for what the track conditions were at the time that they started the race. With how the track dried out pretty quickly, it was never going to be something that was going to work in the long term. But for the time that they were making up all that track position, it seemed like a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the Haas goes, I thought it was, like I said, in baseball terms, it's a swing and a line drive all the way to the wall, back, and caught at the wall. Because it just didn't get over the fence, because they did all but the last piece of it. Yeah, had that pit stop been executed at any sort of way, Haas is probably back in the points. Now he's on the right tire. He's on the newest of the right tire, which would have been very interesting to see how that would have evolved throughout the course as the track continued to dry. Could he have eked out some extra life? Could he have maybe foregone that first pit stop that everybody did, like some others tried to do, hang it out, maybe make it then to the slicks? There was a whole lot of options. We never got to see where that really could have gone because of that. But yeah, I mean, from where they started from, there's nothing to lose there. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I admire the attempt. I just wish it had been a little bit better executed, and maybe then they could have scored a point or two, which is, as we talked about in these standings, is critically important for them.
Mm-hmm.
With respect to Ferrari, the only thing I can think of is they had to have gone the wrong way on the setup between Friday and Saturday. I mean, the Friday running was very compromised anyway. FP1 was pretty much a washout except to the very end. FP2, they looked okay from what I saw when I caught up on that session. But, you get to the Saturday FP3 and the realization that Leclerc says, guys, we just seem slow. I can't explain it. Something happened in the setup. Maybe there was some sort of endemic thing with the Ferraris and this track. I tend to think that it's been track specific. I mean, Ferrari have been really good and really consistent throughout the year. This is really the first real ding in the Ferrari armor that I've seen this season, where they were just off of it. And they made, I think, just some poor decisions with tire management and when to send people out. And in a race like this, where it's as chaotic as everything, track position really, really matters. And when you're starting on the back foot, it becomes that much harder to try to dig yourself out of it. And then the engine thing happens to Leclerc, and it just compounded it. And Sainz was just kind of a victim of being where he was on the grid. So yeah, go back to Saturday if you're looking for what happened to Ferrari.
Yeah, I would agree with you that I think it's a combination of probably the setup and the conditions. I think that if the whole weekend had been dry, and they got a lot more running in, I think that Ferrari probably would have shown a lot better. But their practice time was curtailed a little bit. A lot of a lot of very, very wet running. And it could be that the Ferrari just isn't as good in wet conditions. It could be that we haven't had really a whole lot of like really like wet races so far. So maybe they just weren't really able to nail in the setup for these conditions, and they just even just missing out by a little bit is going to be really harsh right now, because we didn't really talk about this part, but we saw that Max Verstappen and George Russell had the exact same time posted. What we didn't really talk about was that the top 5 drivers in Q3 posted their best times less than 0.2 of a second from first to fifth. So the times are really close right now, and the wet conditions, I think, brought that out even more. That it's really close, and all it takes is a little weather to throw in that mix that makes it even more of a crapshoot. So I think that probably gets Ferrari out a little bit too. Is you miss a little bit of the setup for the conditions, and there's just not a lot of margin for error right now. I mean, if I'm double checking the times here, it looks like I guess there was a little bit of a gap in Q2 between Albon and Leclerc. There was about 0.2 there, so enough of a gap. But I'm going to stick to my guns on this one and say I think it's weather and setup related.
Yeah, and to your point about the lap times being ridiculously close, we've seen that compression, and it's so in the margins. And the good news, if you're a Ferrari fan, is like as I said before, is I think this is a one-off. I think that if they execute a little bit better and shore some things up, they'll be right back up there. I'm expecting them to be just as much in the mix for Spain as any of these now top 4. I am very interested to see what Mercedes does in Spain. That's going to be the bellwether for me. If they can show real well, and it's 3 Grand Prix in a row that they are in the mix in qualifying and throughout the practices, and can make it and get in the mix for the race, hey, then you got 4. Then Aston Martin, it's up to you. When are you going to make it number 5? Because then everybody will have made really the step, and then it becomes a lottery as to who we're going to see. And you might see McLaren at one track, or Mercedes at another track, and Red Bull at a third different track, all be dominant in different ways based on the characteristics of each car.
Mm-hmm. So thank you again, Dave. Our last fan email comes from the Formula. And they said, I'm late to write in. I went to Road America today and watched F1 on demand. McLaren, what the F, guys? Just because you're as fast as Ferrari now doesn't mean you need to start making Ferrari-esque strategy calls. Lando got hosed by staying on those inters 2 laps too long. Also, how many exit clauses do you think Red Bull put in that Checo contract? Surely they left themselves a few ways to break the contract with him. He has shown nothing deserving of a multi-year extension. They might regret that decision, especially if they lose Max. So I'm going to open up this one with saying I think the chances of Red Bull losing Max in the immediate future are extremely slim. The team is built around him at this point. They're going to throw lots of money at him to stay. He's made mention that he doesn't want to be in Formula One forever. And so he might retire significant earlier than we've seen from the likes of like Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton, to be sure. But he is on contract until 2028 or something like that. So he's got a lot of years on his current contract. Sure, he could probably get out of it if he really, really wanted to, but he's driving the best car on the field right now. He's got a great shot at winning the championship this year, probably got a great shot at winning the championship next year. And then we go into the next set of regulations, and it'll be, it'll be completely up in the air as to who's going to really nail that. So it doesn't behoove him to leave right now. He's going to stick around, I think, past the 2 years that are on Checo's contract. yes, I agree that Checo is not showing anything right now that makes that multi-year extension look good. Uh, Red Bull was very much in the public relations space with that contract being signed. Um, you know, touting Checo as fantastic, and he has had his moments. He's got several race wins with Red Bull over the years, including a couple last year. But I think that I don't agree with them re-signing Checo. I think that that seat would be better deserved by Yuki Tsunoda. Probably would be my first say. I don't know if they would go straight to Liam Lawson. I think Carlos Sainz could have been a much more interesting person in that seat. But they just don't want to. They don't want to upset the status quo. They got, in their mind, they got something decent going right now, and that there's a very, very clear number one and number two. They don't want to put anyone in that seat that's going to be able to challenge Max. Checo is very popular, very, very, very popular in Mexico. So I'm sure that having that popularity from him is really good for Red Bull. And so long as he puts together enough points in conjunction with Max to win the constructors, that's all that Red Bull really wants. They got their 1-2 last year. I think they're happy with that. Now they just want to be able to seal in both championships, and so that's, if he's able to play that part, that's what they want for the next 2 years, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, with respect to Checo, and I thought I heard in some of the post race that I think it's a 1+1, so it's a 25 for sure, and then an option on 26. So we're already now hearing reporting about potential exit clauses in the contract that he signed 2 days ago. So yeah, I mean, let that kind of be kind of where it is. We talked about it in our preview. I think, yeah, Checo is a safe bet. I think that's what Red Bull wanted to do. I think they wanted to stop the bleeding, especially given all of the off-track turmoil stuff. So for now, they're going to swallow hard and deal with this. If the trend is continuing, though, I think it will get more and more tense. And especially if you're a guy like Liam Lawson, you got to be wondering, what the heck do I have to do? And the other issue is that this breaks your young driver ladder, which is what your whole organization is structured to help to bring in.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you've made this bed. Now let's see what you're going to do when you sleep in it.
Mm-hmm.
With respect to your McLaren point, I don't agree that was the wrong call for a lap and a half of the 2 laps that they tried it. The first lap, it worked, and he actually extended the gap by 2 seconds. It was 20 seconds at the first time he didn't come in, and at the beginning of the second lap, it was 22 seconds. And for over half the next lap, it was still working. But it was by then, once you get to the second half of that lap, that the runners on the slick tires had gotten them up to temperature and were starting to set faster sectors than Lando was able to do. He comes in. It's so marginal. It was such an on-the-margin thing. And again, I go back to what happens if turn 1 is dry and that is a straightforward exit from the pits. It's at least a scrap with Verstappen. You never know what's going to happen in those types of situations. Maybe they wreck each other, and now we're talking about a whole different situation there. But I thought, if nothing else, in that moment, I thought that the best thing that McLaren had going for it was right when it was getting dry, running on the inters. That was where they were at their best. They went down firing the best bullet that they thought they had. And I can't criticize them for that, just because it didn't necessarily work out. The better criticism to me is the first safety car, where we talked about this at length. They were telling Lando in the hairpin what the situation was, and it didn't seem like they couldn't get through their process quick enough to make the call until it was too late. And that's kind of where I thought the race turned. negative towards Lando there. But if we're bitching and moaning about a P2, boy, that's a great problem to have. I'm ecstatic because I think here's some stats for you to kind of make you feel better about McLaren here. It's the first time they scored points here in 10 years. They had not scored anything here. This was always, in the last 3 iterations of Formula One regulations, has been McLaren's kryptonite. It's been awful. They've had DNFs. They've had engines blow up. There was a race, I know, Lando's first year here, the car died at the end of the pit lane, and it sat there until the end of the race because they couldn't ever clear it. You go from that to being 3 seconds off the win is an amazing turnaround. I'm still enthusiastic for what they can bring to Austria, Spain, Great Britain. These next 3 races are going to be a lot more suited to what you would think is the endemic strength of the car. And now they're scoring in places where they haven't been scored. I actually looked back when I saw the championship, the standings. They've averaged 28 points over the last 6 races as a team. That's really good. So, yeah, I understand the frustration. I was gutted as anybody when I saw that safety car in Lando lose P1. I never got to do the Christian Horner foot thing because we never got to that point. I was almost there. But I'll take what we can get. I'm still enthusiastic. Yeah, I'm still all in on this team for this season. I still think there's going to be some really good things to come.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that the fact that we're upset over Lando getting P2 is a good thing because we're upset because we thought he could win it, which is a very good thing for McLaren right now. They're definitely in the best spot that they have been in many years, and that is very exciting. Last point that I got is I'm very jealous that you were at Road America. Andy and I were just talking that Road America is pretty high up on the places I would go see IndyCar. It's about as close as it gets for us right now, since they don't race Chicagoland, and there's nothing for like Chicago street circuit right now for them. But yeah, for me it would be Indy, Road America, and then someplace like way far away, like Laguna Seca. But yeah, you got. My understanding is you got a decent race today. You got Sewell Power's first win in like 2 years, so that's exciting at least. A bit of a feel gooder there. A couple good accidents there too.
I hope he was there early enough. Kind of burying the lead here. International story, this one. Jamie Chadwick takes her maiden win in Indy Next today.
Ooh, really?
Going up against the guys, won it from pole position.
Ooh.
In a race that I know had a late red flag, and she had 2 really fast cars, including one of her teammates, on her at the end, and she managed to hold both of them off at the end. So congratulations to Jamie Chadwick. I've always said that girl is a badass in a car, and it was just a matter of time before she figured out the Indy formula, and good things are coming. So good on you, Jamie. Fair play up against all the boys today.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I didn't even know about that. That is a fantastic performance, and yeah, she's definitely, I would think, is going to be in IndyCar proper within a season or 2 here with performances like that.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for your feedback on a fascinating Canadian Grand Prix. It's always fun to debate these finer points. I love getting into the margins like this. It's kind of why we do this. But we will transition into our awards, and we will start with the rubbish. Cody, I like your candidate here, and then I have a rant. It's going to be pretty good. I'll let you go first, and then I'll chime in.
I was wondering about who your commentator comment was about earlier, and I just saw your rubbish award here, and I'm like, oh, okay. Now yes, my rubbish award is going to go to Ferrari. As we've discussed at length, they looked fantastic in Monaco. Charles Leclerc gets the win there. Everyone's riding high on Ferrari, and then they can't even make Q3 this time around. They both DNF. Leclerc's got issues up the wazoo with the car, the engine, going on slicks too early as a gamble. Carlos Sainz spinning out and taking out Albon, who was having a great race. It's just a weekend to forget for them.
Yeah, definitely for sure. All right, here comes my rant. Everybody in F1 or any parlance really needs to stop listening to Jacques Villeneuve. I'm really tired of this. This has gone on for a very long time. This is one I always call this the off-season trope when there's nothing going on and this guy who likes to think he has these amazing hot take opinions will show up in the middle of the offseason and I'll see this headline. Jacques Villeneuve, former F1 champion, said something bad about this driver. And here's the thing. As quoted in this publication that you've never heard of, Jacques Villeneuve said last week this odd thing about Lewis Hamilton or whoever. Insert whatever driver you want. It's always, as soon as I see that, I know we are in the dead zone of the off season. We have nothing else to do except listen to this guy. And for some strange reason, Sky Sports decided, because they don't want to send Damon Hill or any of their other proper people to Canada because it's a flyaway race, to put this guy on their punditry team all weekend. And what did he do? First of all, the guy didn't dress like he'd just gotten out of bed. I'm sorry, that's an international broadcast. Do better. And number two, the hot takes he was saying, that's exactly what did you think you were going to get. That's what this guy does. And I know what the counter argument is. We're talking about him, and that's exactly what Sky wanted. And if that's the case, shame on you, Sky. That shouldn't be what we do. These guys, Sky, I always used to say was the gold standard of F1 punditry and commentary. Martin Brundle is amazing. Damon Hill is amazing. Jenson Button is amazing. You have all of these great resources, and instead you give us Jacques Villeneuve. Oh, my God. For the love of God, Sky, don't ever do that again. I'd rather listen to Nico Rosberg, and that's saying something.
Oof. Them be fighting words.
Anyway, all right, rant over.
Maybe that's an unpopular opinion. I think Nico Rosberg is all right.
No, here's my thing with Nico Rosberg. I hate the way he says things, but I actually respect what he says. I will respect what he says a lot more than that clown.
Fair enough.
All right. Anyway, I'm done. Analysis paralysis. All right, we're going to move on to our next award. Cody, what you got here? We might have some agreement here.
I almost thought about changing it after your breakdown of how close it was when the safety car got called out, and Lando pretty much having no choice by that point. But I do still feel like there was room for a choice there. The double yellows had been out after Logan Sargent spun out. We could see on the broadcast that he wasn't going anywhere. He's sitting there, looked like he was done. And so if we could see that, surely the teams knew that. And I think at that point there was still plenty of time for McLaren to make the call to bring in Lando to switch the tires. Sure, maybe he loses track position if other guys decide to stay out. But at that point, he's on the fresh tires, and there was rain coming. So I think he probably would have been in a better spot than having to wait behind the safety car as he's crawling back around and everyone else is catching up after their pit stops due to the Delta time. I think it was a missed opportunity on their part.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a fair critique of that. And I think that's where, if you're going to critique what McLaren did throughout the course of the race, that's where I would put it. I actually it's either one of two things for me. It's either McLaren for not pitting Norris right at that safety car, or Haas not being ready for inters when K-Mag came in, because I thought they had almost pulled off the home run strategy, and they would have got significant gains and gotten farther into the points and made it that much harder to be eliminated from the points. they gave back almost all of what they gained. I think they only gained net 3 positions because of that amazing flying performance, and it just didn't come together because at the very, very end there, they couldn't execute. So that was annoying. So anyway, I'll leave that there. All right, we'll move on to our dark horse of the day. I like the fact that we've got some variety here. Cody, what you got?
I'm going to go with Daniel Ricciardo on this one because for me, he really was a dark horse. Like, I haven't really put too much stock in Daniel Ricciardo this year. He seems to be, outperformed by Tsunoda more often than not. But this time, he really had the better performance here. He had a great qualifying. He was P5, as we said, less than 2/10 away from the pole time in Q3. Managed to turn that around to a good points finish in 8th place for VCarb, and we saw during the conditions of this race that it was anything but simple, and he held on for it. So every time I'm starting to lean toward writing Danny Rick off, he does something like this and has a good result, and I'm like, well, okay, maybe.
Yeah, the question is, can we get some consistency from Danny Rick? It's all we want to see. Still hearing the rumors that he might get confirmed as early as maybe the next race. So looks like it's going to be stability at VCarb for next year. Seems to be the offer of. I mean, I guess that's what they want to do. But anyway,
if that is the case, I really feel for Liam Lawson.
Yeah. Exactly. Like it keeps telling me I'm not sure. I have a theory, but we'll get into that in a preview, I guess, about kind of what I think is actually going on. I think you literally have 2 different heads making 2 different decisions, and I think they're trying to compromise and make each other happy so that they don't tear each other apart. But anyway, we'll see what happens. If we do get some news on that, then I'll kind of share that theory. But my dark horse here is going to be Alpine. Congrats to them on double points. That's not an easy thing to do. They've had a really, really rough run at the start of this season. Some of it's been by their own doing, but they get a good result here. Yes, they took advantage of some foibles of some other teams. The 2 Ferraris going out, the Red Bull Perez going out. That definitely helps the chances, but you got to get your cars to the finish, and they did that. So good on you, Alpine here. Nice to see. All right, driver of the day. I actually thought this one was pretty tough of an award to give out because there were lots of really good, interesting drives. I'm going to give this one to Max Verstappen. I know sometimes we would say, well, we just expect him to take the win. I thought he earned this one. This one was not easy. This one was hard. He had to fight for it. Got overtaken in a couple of places, made some overtakes in other places, stayed ahead of the conditions, and made, was the banner wearer for Red Bull this weekend because his teammate was nowhere. So I'm going to give this one to Max. I thought he deserved it.
Wow, what kind of weird alternate universe are we in where you're giving driver of the day to Max and I'm giving driver of the day to Lando Norris? I do think Lando had several really good shots at winning this race. I think had the Logan Sargent safety car not happened or happened a little later on, I think he was in great position. He was pulling away to a decent lead at that point. And I think, had we had less instances of bunching up the field or that little, potential safety car pit mishap with him, I think he was looking really good at that point. Later on, we thought he might have a shot of getting out in front of Max during the later on pit cycle from wet weather to slicks. He definitely was putting himself in a position throughout the entire race, no matter what happened. He was putting himself in a position to fight for the win. And for me, that puts him as driver of the day. It was a big woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be so much of a homer. I had Norris here, and then at the last minute, I kind of bailed because I'm like, well, I don't want to be the full homer. So thank you for picking me up on that one. Mm-hmm. So it makes me feel better. But all right, so we will move into our predictions, which were kind of a disaster.
They were.
I texted Cody from the rest stop after qualifying where I said, I'm never picking Ferrari to do anything ever again. My faith in the outlap F1 curse wrung its ugly head. I put on all this faith in Charles Leclerc. I had him for like the fastest lap time. I had him for the pole. I had him for maybe taking the win. Wrong. And that just permeated throughout all of our predictions. So, Cody, you only finished with 1 point. You don't get the point for Verstappen on pole, even though you had the same lap time as the pole sitter. But you did get Max to take the win. So you did have that. So that was your one score on the weekend. I got the 2 lap times. The quali time is hilarious. We both thought it was going to be wet. We were both bad, but I was slightly quicker than you, so I get that one. The fastest lap time, however, was fascinating. I got it, and literally just barely. I still have the calculation up. So your lap time was a 1:14.856. That was actually the fastest lap time. You had a 1:14 flat, so your delta was 0.856 seconds. Mine was a 1:15.647, which is a delta of 0.791 seconds. So it's almost less than a tenth in it that I get that extra point, just enough to take this weekend. But we will try to do better in our next round, which will happen in 2 weeks. We are going to Spain, so get the paella ready. We're going to go to the Circuit de Catalunya, a track that we all know, a track that's raced a little bit better since they took out that damn annoying chicane at the end. So we're going to re-rack after the 24 Hours of Le Mans is actually next weekend, so I'm going to do my best to try to put on my WEC helmet and enjoy that for all it is worth. Good luck to all of the combatants there. Again, I want everybody to come home safe from that, but that's always one of my favorite events of the season, is the celebration in France in late June for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. So that's always an awesome environment, and if anyone is going, enjoy. I've heard it's epic. It may be a bucket list for me at some point. I don't know if I'll ever make it, but I've heard it is quite the festival.
Yeah, let's take care of the IndyCar bucket, the Indy 500 bucket first, because that's in the backyard. And then we'll think about hopping the pond. But the 24 Hours of Le Mans is the honestly pretty much the only time I tune in for endurance racing out of the year. But I do find it fascinating how you have so many different classes of cars kind of competing for wins in their own right. And it is really interesting to see how they handle things at night. So I will be tuning into that for a little bit. You're making me hungry with the paella. I love paella. So maybe I'll have to make something to celebrate for the Spanish Grand Prix. Not my favorite track. I seem to remember that the race last year was kind of boring, but that was also when Max is in the midst of his 10 race win streak. So maybe the signs that we're seeing right now point to that race being just a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be a fascinating qualifying. I expect it to be super tight amongst, our top 3 between Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari. I think we'll be back in the mix. I'm really interested to see what Mercedes does around there, and we'll see if they can bring it again. And if they do, I'm all here for the fight. So we'll get into it in just over a week's time. So for Cody, it's been Andy. This has been an amazing Grand Prix. I always love the fact that the sport pays you back when you least expect it, and it's what we needed it to happen. So thank you for tuning in. And as always, may all your laps be fast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Outlap F1 podcast. If you like what you heard, click that subscribe button and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. If you want to connect with us outside of the show, check out our website at www.outlapf1.com. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at OutlapF1 Podcast, or email us at chatnow@outlapf1.com. As always, thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you on the next one.